Hey y'all, welcome back. I'm Mama Dr. Jones, a board-certified OBGYN and mom to four who happens to be from Texas. Today we're talking about the Texas abortion ban. I'm going to explain it to you in a little more detail, describe some clinical scenarios that I worry could be impacted by this ban, and also answer your questions from the community tab. I understand that this is a very difficult topic for a lot of people to talk about. Almost every single person who comes into this video is going to have a preconceived bias about what they think is right, what they think is wrong, or how they feel. I would encourage you to set those aside for 1 minute and just listen to this information, process it, and leave and sit with it. Please try not to make the comment section vile. I will turn off the comments if people are being angry or calling names or having fights in the comment section. If you want to have a discussion, that's great. We have to have discussions around the hard topics. That's kind of why my whole channel exists, but please keep it respectful. Let's start by going through what Texas Senate Bill 8 or SB 8, the Texas abortion ban or Texas heartbeat bill, whatever you want to call it, actually prohibits. If you want to read through it, it's actually pretty easy to read despite having some legal jargon, and I will link it in the description box below. What's actually prohibited under the bill is any termination of a pregnancy in which a fetal heartbeat can be detected by ultrasound. I've seen a lot of people saying that this bans abortion after 6 weeks, and this is not quite accurate. Sometimes you can see fetal cardiac activity a little bit earlier than 6 weeks. Sometimes you can see it a little bit later than 6 weeks. The important part of this is that the bill doesn't actually say anything about weeks pregnant anywhere in the bill. It is all based on what you see on ultrasound, which interestingly is also up to a little bit of interpretation by both how good the ultrasound machine is, the type of ultrasound that's done, who's doing the ultrasound. All of these things are a little arbitrary, which is worrisome when we get to the part about how it's going to be implemented and what the punishments are for breaking it. As a medical professional, it's very clear to me reading through it that there was no one who actually works in medicine or embryology or gynecology who was helping to write this bill, because it's really inaccurate as far as the medical part goes. For example, a fetal heartbeat would not be the embryonic cardiac activity that you see at 6 weeks, which is what they're targeting. The fetal stage starts much later. It's also not a heartbeat at that gestational age because you don't actually have a functioning heart. You don't have valves and chambers like a heart has. Yes, there's an electrical activity, which interestingly could be repeated in a petri dish with the right ions and cells, but it's not actually a beating heart in the sense that we think of it. That's beside the point. I know what their goal is. You know what their goal is. So let's move on past me criticizing the fact that nobody in medicine was helping to write this law. Despite the fact that 6 weeks is an arbitrary thing that people are using, there is a reason people are using it to talk about it, and that's because it makes it easier to understand the time frames. I've seen people saying, well, that means you have 6 weeks after you find out to decide if you want to have a termination. And that is not at all accurate. So let's talk about what being 6 weeks pregnant means, or what being pregnant to the point that the cardiac activity can be seen on ultrasound. For the first 2 weeks of that 6 week time frame, you're not even pregnant. You haven't even had sex. You haven't even ovulated. You're 2 weeks from your last period. You're not pregnant. For the next week, you're still not pregnant. You may have ovulated, you may have had sex, but you haven't had an embryo implant, and I couldn't tell you that you were pregnant. After implantation, it typically takes about a week for you to have enough HCG in your bloodstream to take a pregnancy test and see that it's positive. It certainly can be done a little bit earlier than that. However, most people, unless they are actively trying to get pregnant, are not taking pregnancy tests before they miss a period. So when you first miss a period, you take a pregnancy test. You may now be 4 weeks, 2 days. You take a pregnancy test, it's positive. You're already 4 weeks and 2 days into that 6 week time frame. After that, you have to contact a clinic and get in with a doctor for an ultrasound. Anybody who lives on planet Earth knows you don't just call a doctor and get in tomorrow for an ultrasound, especially not at 4 weeks pregnant, because I typically won't even scan my patients that early because we can't see anything. There's nobody who's going to be able to get in for an ultrasound a day after they find out they're pregnant. It just is not physically going to happen. Let's be generous and say that you're able to get an appointment a week after you call. So now you're 5 weeks and 2 days, as long as your periods are super accurate, and we do an ultrasound. Maybe I see a fetal pulse that does not yet have cardiac activity, and I can direct you to find somewhere where you can have the termination. I've never worked anywhere in Texas where I could provide that, so I can't just do it then for you. There's also a 24-hour waiting period, so then you're already a day into that, so you're 5 weeks, 3 days. Now you have to find a clinic that can either prescribe you the medication, because I can't, the hospital I work at won't let me, or you have to find a clinic that will go ahead and do the termination in the next 4 days. actually in the next 3 days. So clearly I've described to you like the very perfect situation where everything happened like on the day that you maybe first could find out. You got in really quickly. There was no cardiac activity yet. We found you a place to go, and you still only have 3 days to make a decision about what you want to do and have it done. This is completely preposterous. I mean, obviously, when I describe that situation, you should recognize that this is a total and outright ban on abortion. Now, the other way that ultrasound could go is we could already see moving cardiac activity. So too late, even though you're only 5 weeks, 2 days, or 5 weeks, 3 days, sorry, that cardiac activity started a little earlier than average. Or I could see nothing, in which case it would be not the best decision on my part to go ahead and prescribe you medication or send you somewhere that can, or tell you to have a procedure, because we haven't even confirmed that you have a pregnancy in the uterus, and we need to make sure it's actually in the uterus before we start intervening, because if it's somewhere else, that could cause problems. So I'm sure you can understand already that this is not really practically a 6-week abortion ban. It's a total abortion ban. As of 2014, 43% of Texans already lived in a county that had no abortion services whatsoever. Like I just told you, many hospitals and clinics just don't let their doctors provide medication or procedures for elective termination. And so access was already really difficult, as we relied pretty much on the privately employed physicians and Planned Parenthoods and stuff like that. That was 7 years ago, and access has only decreased greatly since then. And that's access for any purpose, any kind of abortion service that you can think of: elective, rape, incest, lethal anomalies, what have you. All these people, almost half of Texans, lived in a county where they could not access that. So let's circle back to the actual legislation. What are the exceptions under this legal statute? There are no exceptions for rape, incest, age, lethal anomaly in the fetus, health condition in the mother, except a statement that says if a physician believes that a medical emergency exists that necessitates non-compliance with the law, and then goes on to give a whole bunch of documentation, things that you have to do in order to not comply. In theory, and what I keep seeing repeated over and over on the internet, this means that termination is legal if the life of the person who is pregnant is in danger. However, it is not that simple, and I really want this to be one of the take-home points of this message. Life endangerment is not a black and white thing. It's not like one day everything's fine and the next day your life is in danger, let's do something. This is gray, right? This is a situation where somebody comes in, they're 17 weeks pregnant, their water has broken, the fetus still has a heartbeat, but they're not sick. Is that their life being in danger? That scenario is unfortunately not uncommon. It is something I see all the time in my personal practice. And it is also the start of a story of a 31-year-old dentist from Ireland who had this happen to her when Ireland had very similar abortion laws as to what has now been enacted in Texas. Unfortunately, her medical team was afraid to intervene because they had been threatened by the government with legal interventions and criminalization if they chose to intervene, and it was at a point before the law saw her life as being in danger. She started to get septic. She asked for a termination. The fetus still had a heartbeat. The medical team was afraid to intervene. She was getting sicker, but was her life actually on the line yet? You don't know that until a legal system comes back in hindsight and says, yeah, at the point you intervened, it was fine. So what you're sitting here balancing while somebody's life is on the line, when does it become fine? Anytime you have your medical team afraid to intervene in what they know is right and what the patient is asking for, there will be bad outcomes. She died. She went into cardiac arrest and she died. The fetus died. She died. We lost a life because the medical team was afraid to intervene and do what they knew was right. Unfortunately, this is a scenario that I am relatively certain will happen in Texas before we are able to repeal this law. In the comments, I know there are going to be people saying just deliver the baby. This is still considered abortion. Medically and legally, me inducing delivery on a 17-week fetus that is going to die, there's no way to offer help to save it at that gestational age, is abortion. I know that some really extremist groups have made you think that the only thing that counts for abortion is a dilation and evacuation, and you've seen all the horrible pictures, but that's not true. Legally and medically, if you are 17 weeks pregnant and you end the pregnancy, no matter how you do it, it is abortion. So yes, under this legal statute, that would still be illegal until there is a clear threat to the mother's life. Once again, this is hard to say exactly when that happens, and there will be situations where your medical team waits too long because they are scared to intervene and someone dies. In Ireland, this case actually is what changed their abortion laws. I don't know if that would even change the abortion laws here, honestly, but we'll have to wait and see. I'm sure something like this will happen. I just hope it's not to me or you or your family friend or my patient or anyone else, because it's going to be traumatic for everybody involved. So what's a penalty when you break this law? Honestly, when this legislation got first submitted and presented in May, I didn't make a big deal about it because I thought there's no way that they will be able to actually get this passed. Even with Amy Coney Barrett being put into the Supreme Court, I did not think that they would actually get this put into place. I thought it was legal posturing. I thought that would fall through. I thought that the Supreme Court would say that is not something you can do. Unfortunately, what I didn't understand at that time is that the way that they have implemented and written this law is that there's no actual penalty for breaking the rules. The penalty is basically tattling on your neighbors, reporting people, and individually suing them in civil lawsuits. So they have made us the purveyors of the state, okay? What this law has done is take away any kind of government oversight of the punishment and given it to the people. Essentially, they have asked regular, everyday citizens, notably, on the same day that they made open carry of guns completely legal for anyone over 21, no matter whether they had a license or certification to carry it. I digress. They have made us the police for this, which is bananas. Why should we be able to ask the people of the state to become the surveillance state for a law that has no actual punishments under the law? Well, since they couldn't make it something that they enforced, because that would have most likely got the law stopped by the Supreme Court, they made it us. We are the surveillance state now. And this is really terrifying as a physician on the side of the kind of violence that it could create, but also that it's very difficult for me to understand as a physician if I was the one sued for this. So let's go back to that situation of being 17 weeks pregnant. In that situation, the person who's pregnant is saying, I want a termination, I'm sick, I'm dying. I think, yeah, you're sick, you're dying. The husband thinks, no, she's not sick enough, you can't do it. Well, we decide because the patient and I both agree, and the medical team agrees that we need to intervene, that we will intervene. We intervene, the patient lives. The husband says, see, she wasn't sick enough to do the abortion, I'm suing you. Because the patient living is going to give you a hindsight bias that, oh, see, the patient wasn't sick enough to intervene. So it's extremely problematic. I feel very concerned about the way that it is written as far as how it will interfere with our ability to take care of patients on the worst day of their life. Now, do I even have the ability, when it is someone external suing me, to bring all of her medical records to the court case? In a normal court case, it is the patient who sues us, and that is why we can expose their protected health information in a court case. But if an external person is suing me, especially in a situation where the patient gave consent, thought we should do it, and doesn't want to be a part of the lawsuit, what protection do I have? I don't think I can just take their medical records up on the stand when the patient's not involved in the lawsuit. I don't know. It's beyond me. I guess we just have to wait and see how it actually plays out. But that is a concern. This is a concern for, just that one clinical scenario. But there are many, many applications of this. Nothing in this bill allows the person seeking or having an abortion, even if it is an illegal abortion, to be sued. So the punishment to you as someone who's pregnant in this situation is carrying a pregnancy that you didn't give permission to continue using your body. So who can the general public decide to bring a civil lawsuit against? It could be a doctor, a person who got them to the clinic. It even is a little bit weird about the language of telling someone how to obtain an abortion. So I don't know if someone came in and they were in that perfect scenario where there actually wasn't cardiac activity, if I would be able to be sued for just giving them information about a clinic that could provide them that service. It's not clear to me. And again, we just have to wait and see how it plays out. Fine is stated to be like a minimum of $10,000 and also includes the other party's court fees as well as your court fees, but nobody accounts for all the lost time where I'm not able to take care of sick COVID patients because someone sued me for saving their wife's life. So effectively, as you can see when I describe this makes abortion illegal in Texas under every circumstance except a very clear life-threatening circumstance, which is a difficult thing to identify when it becomes black and white. That's a basic rundown of the law. I want to talk about a few other situations which would be impacted by this. Obviously, All elective terminations are impacted by this. It doesn't matter if you were raped by your uncle and now you're pregnant. It doesn't matter if you are a neurodivergent 13-year-old who was raped by a 23-year-old. It doesn't matter. Unless your life is immediately in danger, termination is not legal to you. There are fetal anomalies that are impacted by this. Some people who have a fetus who has no kidneys, these babies are born and essentially suffocate. The fluid around the fetus is needed to develop the lungs. When a fetus does not have kidneys, it doesn't continue to replenish the amniotic fluid in its sac and its lungs never develop. So there are, a bunch of options in this situation. I've had plenty of patients who said, I just want to stay pregnant. I want to carry the baby to term. I want to be able to hold it when it's born. And that's fine. You should have that choice. But I also have a lot of parents who say, I think it would be very, very emotionally difficult on me to have a baby that I know is going to die and have to go to the grocery store and everybody asks, oh, is it a boy or a girl? What's its name? And then I have to say, well, it's a boy, but it's going to die when it's born. This is very traumatic. And also a lot of parents who say, I don't know what to do, but I feel like the most compassionate thing is to end the pregnancy so that this fetus isn't born and suffers at the time of dying when it's born. So, there's no right answer to that, but now 2 of those options are taken away. You cannot choose to end the pregnancy because you are distressed about it and worried about carrying to term, and you cannot choose to end the pregnancy because you feel like that is the more humane thing to do for your very wanted child. So that has taken away that option completely for my patients. There's not an option. And there are countless scenarios like that. Babies who have anencephaly, where their brain doesn't develop, but they have a brain stem. Other lethal chromosomal anomalies. All of these things where our patients could choose between, honestly, 2 really horrible choices, having a baby that dies or having a termination that they don't want. But now they don't have a choice. Now they have to stay pregnant. And, this circles back a little bit to the when is your life in danger thing. Pregnancy is always higher risk than not being pregnant. You're at an increased risk of dying by homicide because domestic violence is very high. You're at an increased risk of dying from pregnancy complications. And if you are unhealthy, any of your medical conditions can also put you at risk for dying. So what do we do with the patient who comes in at 8 weeks, they were on birth control, and they have severe aortic stenosis, and it will probably kill them to carry the pregnancy, or they have a 50% chance of dying if they continue the pregnancy. But right now, they're too far along for an elective termination and they're not dying actively, so I'm not legally allowed to intervene. These scenarios are important for me to include because a lot of people don't know that they happen. A lot of people don't understand that you don't just become life-threateningly ill one moment and it's a very clear, defined line. It's a process. And a lot of people don't understand when they're voting for these laws what the implications of how they are implemented into medical practice actually mean. And so I think it gives a little bit of context. Okay, let's jump into a few questions that you left in the community tab. I think there are 3,600 comments, so I definitely won't get to them all, but I'm going to try to answer some of the top ones and maybe some of the more common ones. I'm curious what this means for doctors who counsel you but don't actually perform the procedure. Would HIPAA prevent courts from allowing the third party to ask them to testify about any conversations that we had? I have absolutely no idea. As I mentioned, that is a concern of mine too. I think it's a legitimate concern. I honestly have no idea how your privacy protection comes into this if I am sued because somebody suspects that I performed an illegal abortion on you. I wish I could answer this, and I feel like I should be able to answer this, but I can't. How are you supposed to medically manage a woman after she finds out carrying a fetus full term will result in a high probability that she will die or become severely sick? In that scenario, under the current way that this reads in the legal statute, I would not be able to do anything until she is very sick or dying. Where is the line drawn between what's considered medically necessary and elective? It's gray. I don't know. Can you tell me? Can you tell me when someone goes from being fine to being almost dead? I mean, I would really like to not wait until my patient is coding to offer them a termination that could save their life. So how does PCOS and other potential factors that could result in gestational age miscalculations affect legalities and practical risk to each party? The actual law is written as fetal cardiac activity on ultrasound. So how this will affect people with really irregular periods is that those people have a tendency to find out later that they are pregnant. In fact, when I described that scenario earlier, that is really the best case scenario. And most of those people are going to be people who are actively trying to get pregnant. There will be a handful of people who want an elective termination and find out early enough, but that is going to be the rarity. So Although PCOS will certainly make it where you're further along, most likely, especially if you have irregular cycles, before you know, it definitely is going to affect everybody, even who has regular cycles, if they're not actively seeking pregnancy, and especially for people who have situations where their birth control failed or whatever. I think people, including lawmakers, are confused about the actual timeline of events in those first weeks. How long after insemination does electrical activity actually start? Cardiac activity at this embryonic stage is going to be an electrical pulse of where the heart is starting to develop, and it's not even a heart, like I was saying earlier. There's no chambers, there's no valves, it's not functioning like a heart like you and I would think about, but you'll start seeing some movement and electrical activity there around 5.5 to 6.5 weeks. It is variable because we aren't in there with an embryo looking at it, right? We're using technology, and technology is run by a person, and this isn't ever going to be 100% accurate. So somewhere between 5.5 and 6.5 weeks, you can probably see some kind of flicker on the ultrasound machine. And that's going to play out to be about 3 to 4 weeks after you have sex. Is that right? No. Yeah, that's right. I'm curious about what they're telling women who want to get their tubes tied. I've heard a lot of women saying that they are and have been for a long time and made it extremely difficult. Yeah, so tubal ligation, I've talked about this before and some of the problems that come along with that. I'm not going to dive deep in it here because it's not what this is about, but it certainly is problematic that yes, it is also sometimes difficult to get your tubes tied. I will link in the description box below or in the iCard a video I did specifically on tubal ligation and difficulties with access and my response to that. Watch this video first and then hop over there and watch that one. What if carrying the child puts the mother at risk, physical or mental? I would really appreciate your unbiased medical knowledge on this subject. At this point, with the way that the law is written, it doesn't matter if you're at risk. Risk of dying or getting sick while you're pregnant is always going to be higher than when you're not pregnant. So that is not going to be something that is going to allow us to bypass this law. Unfortunately, I really think, like I was saying earlier, that it's going to have to be someone who is actively dying before we can feel comfortable intervening and not think we'll get sued. And even then, I think if the patient lives, there's a very good chance that either a family member, a friend, potentially even someone on the medical team could bring it as a lawsuit. This topic gets me very heated, but you're one of the few people I'd trust to discuss it in a comprehensive, fair, and understandable way. I appreciate that. I don't know if I have done that. I hope that I have done that, and I hope that you all can keep it equally civil in the comments, because I think that I've presented some really legitimate concerns here that even people who personally are opposed to elective abortion should understand are really problematic with implementing this kind of legislation. How does your job as an OBGYN change in this situation? Will you be legally obligated to tell your patients that they should continue the pregnancy? What are the ethical issues surrounding it? I don't know. I mean, obviously, if I am legally required to tell my patients that they should continue their pregnancy, I have a big problem with that because I don't think that's ethical. I don't think me telling you to terminate or to continue a pregnancy is ethical. Neither one of those is ethical. Me telling you the process, where to get help, no matter what your decision is, me explaining, where we're at in the pregnancy. My job is to convey information to you so that you can make the decision that is best for you. This law does enforce a rule that if you are going to provide termination services legally, so you're before that cardiac activity or you have somebody who is sick and dying, you must provide with them a bunch of information about how termination increases infertility risk and all of these other nonsense things that aren't true. So it does mandate, which has already been in place, this was a mandate that we already had, that I have to tell you things that are not accurate. But I don't know. I have no idea if it is wide enough to allow someone to sue me for giving someone information about where to obtain an abortion. In any situation at any point in the pregnancy, how does the law distinguish between illegal abortion, infanticide, and tragic miscarriage? Are there always concrete medical ways to tell what happened after the fact? No, actually there's not. And that's actually something I hadn't thought about, is that now while we have people coming in miscarrying on their own and someone who is not privy to the information decides they're going to bring a civil suit, luckily, this does protect the patient from being sued. So it's not the patient that can have a civil lawsuit brought against them, which I'm happy about, but I see major issues with threatening your medical team with criminalization for when to step in and save your life. Major problems. I think there's a great misconception that all abortion is getting rid of an unwanted kid. I would love to see information on some of the reasons why a happy pregnancy becomes a merciful abortion. People who haven't experienced this have no idea. Yeah, there's lots of situations where that's the case, and these would all now be illegal in Texas, and I discussed a few of them earlier, but I do think it's really important to recognize this as well. I do worry about when we're walking that line if people will say, well, then I want to make all elective termination illegal, because even that has a gray area, right? Like, who are we to be referees and judges? Is rape going to be elective termination? Is incest? Is being 13-year-old? Well, what happened? Where, at what point, what age does that become not something that is medically necessary? Like, these are all gray things. Everybody's reason for choosing abortion is different. And when we start legislating based on somebody's personal reasoning, it becomes very problematic, which is why that doesn't work generally to pass laws specifically outlawing elective termination, because this is a gray zone, right? Abortion and choosing an abortion has a lot to do with having control over your body. And people say sometimes, a fetus deserves to have rights. And I think we afford rights to a fetus in a lot of ways, but it's probably short-sighted to give them rights that you and I and everybody else on the planet doesn't have, which is the right to use somebody else's body. If my child is dying, so Pax is 2, he's dying, he needs a kidney. You can't force me to give him my kidney because it's mine and I don't have to do that, even if it would save his life. The government doesn't force you to. You don't force somebody to donate their organs at the time of death, even though that could save a whole bunch of people's lives. So there's some problems with saying like a fetus deserves rights, because yes, I think that to an extent we can say that, but they don't get rights that everybody else doesn't have. So that's kind of how I look at it from that standpoint. And my views on this have changed over time. I grew up in the Bible Belt in a small town in Texas in, extremist Baptist evangelicalism and purity culture, and believing that this was completely wrong. I went from a point of believing abortion in general was wrong to saying that I didn't think it should be criminalized because it's more problematic to make these bans and criminalize it, to now just feeling like a lot of times this is a neutral. And I think it's come from a place of just sitting and hearing people. After listening to a lot of people, I've come to see this very much as a neutral. Abortion is not good. Abortion is not bad. It just is. It just is. We have to remember, anytime we're talking about this, we are talking about a living, breathing adult person or child who needs an abortion and is making choices that they believe are best for them. And I have a really hard time with the idea that I should think I know what's best for you. Would medical exemptions be available in cases like this? What if the fetus has died, has no heartbeat? I can't believe this is happening. If you have a fetus that has no heartbeat, this law does not apply anymore. Is it true that you can be accused without evidence? Does the prosecution of such claims require evidence, or is hearsay enough? Really, I do not see much difference between this and the Salem witch trials, but I'm hoping that I misunderstood something. I feel like this is very accurate. Yes, you could be accused without any evidence. I was a little worried about making this video because of that, because I am genuinely worried that somebody is going to see me talking about it online and very clearly being opposed to the passing of this law and decide that they want to throw me into the pile too. And yes, you can be accused with no evidence. It's just a reporting system. Anybody can file a report, and when it's followed up on, who knows how they decide which ones go to actual civil suits. I don't know. What kind of support programs are available for women who are denied an abortion? Financial assistance, support groups, adoption programs, etc. The same ones we've always had. Unfortunately, we're going to have a whole bunch of people having babies that now have no support afterwards. We didn't increase how we're going to take care of these babies that people are having into situations that they either can't support them, don't want to support them, are trying to navigate the adoption system. What happens when we have all of these new babies in the system? These are problems that are going to happen that are totally not addressed within this legislation. We didn't increase access or increase those services at all with this legislation, despite the fact that there is clearly going to be a need for increased access to those services. So essentially, nothing. Grab yourself by the bootstraps, pull yourself up, and get through it. What about a fetus diagnosed with a serious disorder that is incompatible with life in the womb? Normally, parents are given the option to terminate. Will that no longer be the case? This would not be a situation where you could legally have a termination. I can hear MDJ now saying, if something changes in your cycle, take a pregnancy test. Absolutely, as always, but even more now if you live in Texas. As an HG sufferer, I'm curious if someone suffering from a severe case of HG would be allowed to terminate. HG is hyperemesis gravidarum, which can be a very, very severe form of morning sickness, which is not at all morning sickness. It's like constant vomiting, can't keep anything down. A lot of these patients have to be hospitalized. Many of them end up with feeding tubes. It is absolutely miserable. It absolutely takes a huge toll on your body and interferes with your whole life. Most of them cannot work or do anything really to function at all. So they're asking if this would prevent termination for the purpose of hyperemesis. And yes, it would. You would not be allowed to terminate under that situation. Unless you were actively dying from malnutrition or hyperemesis or whatever. But what do you have to go through to get to that point? As an OB-GYN, would you get in trouble if you direct a patient to look for aid within a state that has less restrictions, like New Mexico, or for telling them to go find help from an organization like the Center for Reproductive Rights? I don't know. I have no idea if me telling a patient like go to Colorado or go somewhere else would be something I could get sued for. It also puts a lot of burden on the places that have that. And it's also not possible for a large majority of people who are seeking abortion to do that. Texas is a massive state, if you haven't noticed. So most of the time going to New Mexico or Colorado, depending where you live in the state, is going to be a 5 to 8 hour drive or a flight, which costs money. You need time off work. You have to justify where you're going. You need a car to get there. Most of these places don't just have like public transport that you can take to Colorado. This is really an inaccessible solution to the problem. And one of the reasons these bills always pass, because the rich people in power can always still access termination. I want to be very clear. If I was in a situation where I needed termination, I could still get it. This law would probably not affect me unless I was too sick to be transferred and my medical team was dragging their feet about whether I was dying or not. It would not affect me if I needed an elective termination because I have the funds and I know where to go. But it will affect the people who can't do that. It's a very classist, ableist, racist law that prevents the people at the bottom of this socioeconomic hierarchy from accessing this procedure. All I can say is if you live in a state that has not passed this legislation, please share this around so that if you have a state where you're trying to get this legislation passed, that your state is educated enough to vote against it. This sets a precedent for other states, and I can guarantee you copycats of this legal statute will be popping up in other places very soon. So please help people become educated. I hope that I was level-headed enough in this video that even if you hate me and the fact that I'm not opposed to abortion in general, that you were able to get through this and understand why, even if you are someone that considers themselves against abortion, you can hopefully understand how incredibly concerning legal statutes like this are and the outcomes that they can have. I hope that you learned something today. If you have any more questions, please leave them in the comments down below. Share this video with somebody who needs to learn more about it. Please be civil. I will block and ban and delete with no hesitation for anyone who is name calling or doing anything outrageous in the comments. Thanks for being here. I will see you next Monday.